Sure. Hello, greetings, everyone, and thank you for this invitation to introduce our program, UAP Medical Coalition. My name is Ted Rowe. I'm the founder and current director. I established this program with the help of some very talented and motivated people, some of who are with us. We're preparing videos and other material, and we are making subject matter experts available as well. We have a number of people on staff that are experienced with providing support for people with UAP exposures and can offer perspective based on that experience. While our program doesn't directly support experience, in June of 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released its preliminary report on UAP. Along with the reality of UAP as described, it cited three primary concerns: national security, aviation safety, and stigma that is inhibiting research and dialogue. It is this stigma and bias that we are confronting through UAP Medical Coalition. Entire populations are underserved because the underlying cause of their issues is not thought to be real. Airline pilots, military personnel, civil authorities, and the civilian population at large are currently denied this witnesses, including PTSD, hypervigilance, sleep disorders, and more. However, the mental health and medical community have yet to develop responses and support for people with UAP exposures. It is our intent at UAP Medical Coalition to advocate for and to assist with that necessary change.
Okay, so for the people here, we mostly want to answer questions about UAP Med. So who has a question?
So you have just been seeing people that have been exposed to unexplained episodes, or do you have any experience with things that have been gleaned from some of these bodies that supposedly the government has?
Okay, so the question, and if you guys heard it, was have you dealt with actual entity bodies, or are you looking at people who have been exposed to extraterrestrials or UFOs?
I think the truth is, for all of us, we've been working with this on this for quite a long time. I've been seeing basically experiencers on and off for the last 40 years. And I think my experience is typical of the group. There are other people who have had more extensive experience than I have. I think our attempt basically is to talk to people. In many cases, we have hypnotized experiencers and been able to get records from them. All of us have been in touch with people who have done extensive research via hypnosis. And by extensive, I mean hundreds of cases. So I think that, this is a well-informed group, or at least as well-informed as you can be when you don't have direct access to whatever the entities are. Our responsibility, basically, through this group is to try to provide a path for people who are experiencers to talk to medical personnel, to talk to therapists, and we're trying to remove the stigma that's associated with these kinds of experiences. I don't think any of us would claim that we have the answer to what these experiences are, and we recognize that there's a huge diversity of experiences. I mean, just to take a simple example, for instance, many of the people who have had experiences seem to have had a good experience and see the the experience they had as being educational or inspirational. By the same token, quite a number of other people have had experiences that are extremely negative. And in some cases, I think Les would tell you, people start in the beginning with an attitude of disturbance and so forth, and then toward the end become reconciled. But that's not always been my experience. And I think there's really quite a variety of experiences. What we want to do is basically allow people who need somebody to talk to be able to make that call, to be able to say it, call up and say, hey, some stuff has happened to me. I'm not sure what it means and so forth, but here's what I remember. And then have the therapist or the medical person or whoever take it from there.
Yeah.
In great contrast to what often happens in these situations, where basically you're treated like somebody with a tin hat, or somebody says, well, gosh, that must be psychotic experiences that you're having. But we know actually from studies of experiencers that psychosis is relatively rare. I mean, psychotic can have these experiences too, but the average person who has an experience is not psychotic, and that is not the explanation for their experiences. So I think that's a summary. Other people can make some comments.
Thank you. Deb, I would add to that our focus is on the professional and academic cadres. We are trying to inform them so they can bring their skill set to bear on the problem, have their debates, write their journal articles, come up with solutions that make things tolerable for people who are having to cope with these experiences, these exposures. So we're trying to inform the doctors. Let's put it that way.
And I think to
go ahead,
Ted,
Les.
yeah, to get on, also add to that. I think the original question from the gentleman was that have we ourselves had any experience with aliens directly, or bodies and things of that nature? And the answer is no. This has all been through conversations with experiencers and telling us what they did see. And again, as Ted said, our focus really is to inform the mental health community, the medical community, hypnotherapists that are working with people like that, because what's going on right now is that the floodgates are going to open with all these whistleblowers coming forward now and saying, yes, we have crashed UFOs, we have alien bodies, things of that nature. So this is going to cause people to all of a sudden say, well, my situation is more real now. It confirms in a way what has happened to them. So then what? What happens next? Usually what happens next is they go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they find out that they don't have a psychopathology. And so a lot of times these people are given drugs, and they don't really need those kind of drugs. And they need educated mental health practitioners that understand the phenomena, and that's what this organization is trying to do.
Yes.
Okay, guys, I'm going to ask another question.
Okay, who has a question?
I got my.
Okay, I don't, go ahead, it's all right.
What percentage would you say of the alien cases are positive encounters, and what percentage are not positive encounters? And is there anybody compiling a data bank of the types of species and what they look like, and the ones that you should stay away from and the ones that potentially are nice?
Yeah, there's definitely been many studies done, and the Free organization did an extensive research project where they came up with a number between 70 and 80% of the people have had positive experiences, and so the rest of them have had negative experiences. But my organization has also done a project called the Omega-3, which was funded by MUFON back in 2010, where we took 71 people that were experiencers and 51 people that were control group. And we found that these people did not have a psychopathology. They weren't fantasy prone. And so, but their worldview certainly changed after these experiences. And all of these experiences start off very traumatic. There's no question about it. And then people get to a point where they feel more comfortable with it. And then in the later stages, as Ron briefly alluded to, they wonder why it stopped. And it's almost like the Stockholm syndrome. And as far as the creatures are concerned themselves, there's a group that is very standard. You have the grays, you have the short grays, the tall grays, you have the mantid type, you have the Nordic type, you have the reptilian type, and even within those groups, it's a mixed bag. Just like we have here on this planet, we have good people and we have bad people. The same thing is going on with these non-human intelligences. There's some good ones. I've heard stories about people having terrible experiences with the reptilians, and then on the other hand, there's people that have had great relationships with them. So again, it's a real mixed bag. You can't say it's black or all white. It's a mixture.
I'd like to interject something here too, and that as far as an organization goes, we're very neutral on all of this. We don't know really about any of these groups, whether they're good or bad, or if they exist. What we know is that they're part of the literature. They're part of what people talk about. And if a professional comes to us, a mental health professional, and he wants to know about some aspect of UAP exposures, perhaps that involves occupants, he can look at the scope of occupant cases and get an understanding of what that's about and how that looks to him in the context of trying to help his patient. So the purpose is really to do that. We aren't here to tell you that there are aliens or not. We really don't. I mean, technically speaking, we have no leg to stand on that topic. What we're here to do is provide help for people who've been exposed to UAP and who have these exposures, and to make sure that we advocate for them so that they're taken seriously when they present their issues. That there's an understanding that UAP are real, they happen, and there's a lot we don't know about them. They're as Les and others who are working with experiencers are telling us there are, from their perspective, what they know about that. But that isn't necessarily our position as an organization. We aren't coming down on anybody's side on this. Other than the side that acknowledges that these things happen and that they have effects on people.
One thing to add too is the fact that when Debbie introduced us, I'm a member of the MUFON ERT as well, and Jesse is part of MUFON and the ERT, and my organization was set up specifically to help people having paranormal experiences, and as it turns out, most of those experiences were contact with non-human intelligences. And so we have a online, totally confidential online support group. We also have referrals to mental health practitioners and hypnotherapists. And then we also have a triage group, which is similar to the ERT, called the EST, the Experiencer Support Team, which is a group of people that have a lot of experience with those kind of things. So I just want to throw that out there really quickly. Again, that's not, UAP Med has an affiliation with us and with the MUFON ERT. And so we're this branch over here that is here to help people like that. But again, UAP Med is focused on educating the mental health community and the medical community in these factors that these people are having, these types of experiences.
Okay, guys, can you please explain really quick some examples of some of the medical things that we've discovered in doing research?
Jesse, or
Let's go with Jesse on that, because he's doing a lot of the medical.
So yeah, we've come to find, I mean, if you go over to our forum, that's where I say the magic happens at, because that's where most of the education comes from. And it really goes through the list of all the different effects that people can walk away with from exposures from UAPs. You're talking everything from different things going on with your brain, from gastrointestinal to nosebleeds to radiation poison, loss of hair. I mean, you can go down the line, just about every kind of side effect you can imagine occurs during these UAP exposures, depending on what you're exposed to. One of the big cases is the Cash Landrum case. A lot of people know about that case. They seen a big object in the middle of the street. The family got out of the vehicle, and the next day they wind up having radiation poison. They woke up sick in bed. They were throwing up. They had their hair falling out, and that was from exposure from a UAP. And that's just one major example of that. And we kind of got a win recently with John Burroughs being the first individual to get benefits from having exposure from UAP. So we're kind of moving the field forward, and that's what we kind of hope to do here as well. So there is a forum that you can go and check out over at uapmed.com, and you can go through the forum and get educated yourself on it. So it's really educating everybody on top of the medical professionals as well.
Other physical effects include sleep disturbances, hypervigilance, things that border on psychological problems, the physical, mental state, as well as mental issues, PTSD and trauma. Really.
Yes, some more actually audible tones before contact. People talk about that. Certainly, you've probably heard about marks on the body, puncture marks, triangular marks, dots, surgeries that have taken place that heal abnormally fast. Of course, implants are talked about, paralysis, recurring headaches, eye and vision issues. Lying on an examining table and being probed, missing fetuses, telepathy and psychic abilities, metallic taste in the mouth, feeling of heat and sometimes sunburn. And to what Ted said, anxiety, fear of specific locations, flashbacks and sleep disturbances, as you said.
Can we, CJ, can you come in and talk a little bit about the psychology aspect?
Sure. I came to this field quite by accident. I'm a clinical psychologist in East Tennessee, own a private practice, and I had some people just sort of around the same time. They didn't know each other, but they came, into the practice and were asking for help with what I found to be a fairly odd constellation of symptoms and problems. And in talking with them over time, the narrative changed from, well, I'm having issues with sleep to, well, I'm having nightmares. Okay, and then from nightmares, it became, I'm having trouble, telling when I'm awake versus when I'm asleep, and there are these beings here. And at first I was just very, sort of flabbergasted and thought, what is this? What does this mean? And what I have seen is that if I'm able to be empathic and open and just emotionally and intellectually curious, I can hold enough space for that person to kind of tell me what's going on, and we can kind of work through it, even if we don't understand fully what it is. But yeah, the psychological effects range from everything that looks like traditional trauma responses, certainly like PTSD sorts of symptom constellations, all the way over to what I would consider neurobehavioral effects or neuroanatomical deficits. People who, I had this one guy who he'd had an IQ test for some sort of job application like 5 years prior to us working. Young guy, fit, healthy, no history of traumatic brain injury, seizures, epilepsy, nothing. We repeat the same battery and we see these weird deficits within his intellectual functioning. So that in some ways, things were dialed down, in other ways, things were dialed up. So it's just a really broad spectrum of things that you kind of see with this population. Did I answer your question, Deb?
Yes, I think you did great.
Okay.
Could you please talk about the safety aspect? We're also covering that.
Oh,
Did you-
sure.
Are you able to hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah. Some of you might know me. I co-founded the National Aviation Reporting Center on Anomalous Phenomena, and our primary focus was on pilots and aviation safety related UAP incidents, or UAP incidents that had safety factors involved. And we identified a number of them, everything from proximity hazards to near mid-air collisions, this kind of thing, runway incursions. There were a number of issues around it, but safety was a primary issue for that population, for pilots. And that's my experience with UAP and safety in that regard. But there are other populations that are dealing with this too, like the military, and they're bound by their oaths and classification status, what they can talk about and what they can't. In some cases, they need help and they can't even ask for it. So there are a number of populations that are involved with the safety conversation. Maybe somebody else in the team has some things to add to that.
Yeah, so I also run Project BATTEC, which is an affiliate for UAP Medical Coalition, and we research and investigate all electrical malfunctions associated with a UFO sighting or an encounter. And again, we come across one of different EM effects during sightings that really cause a threat to people, places, etc. One of the big cases that we looked at was Leonard Stringfield's case. He was flying right before the end of World War II, 3 days before. Him and 13 specialists and 2 pilots are flying in a C-46 cargo plane. On the left side of the plane, we have 2 or 3 unidentified objects fly up to the left wing. And at that time, the C-46 cargo plane begins to malfunction and the engine starts blowing out smoke. The craft then starts flying down to go down and drop in an altitude. And we're thinking that everyone's going to die on this plane because of this issue. Well, the UFOs fly away and the engine kicks back on and the black smoke stops coming out and everybody lands safely in Tokyo. So this is just one example of many. And we've actually had some cases where UFOs come in close proximity, and unfortunately, we've had some people pass away. Some big cases with that. So EM is a real big factor when it comes to safety issues in UAP in this situation.
Thank you. Before I ask the next question, does anyone here have a question that they want answered?
Based off the data, is there any recognizable shield designs to avoid?
Is there anything we could do to prevent? Maybe Earl, you can answer this since you've got in a little late.
What was that? Was there any particular shape to the UFOs that are?
It was more like considering what's going on with science and everything right now. The question was, can you prevent this from happening? Can we prevent the radiation sickness? Can we prevent some of these psychological issues? Is there a way to prevent?
Well, the easiest and most kind of obvious one is don't run towards a UFO or get closer to one. I think that proximity is the factor when it comes to people suffering effects from the electromagnetic field that these craft seem to have natural as part of their propulsion system. So you want to keep your distance. Also, what I've noticed is if you get just personal experience, if you're 40 feet away, you're still sort of cognitive and you do the right thing. Much closer and you're highly suggestible by whoever is flying craft. I know that, when I got about 35 feet away and I was in my car, driving towards this object, that it was as though I had never learned the proper procedures for documenting a case. And I was chief investigator for MUFON at the time. Did I take photos? Did I take videos? Did I call media or call people up that were on the STAR team at MUFON? No, it was as though all that had been forgotten. When I was 40 feet away from it, I was doing the right thing. I was looking for, how could this, if this is a hoax, how do they perpetrate it? How do they, tether this thing up, and there was no way that it could have been tethered up. It was massive tonnage there in the sky that didn't belong there. But proximity, 35 feet away, I drove right past a miracle. I drove past the smoking gun of all UFO videos and photographs, because I was no longer in control of my own cognitive processes.
Thank
So,
you.
mhm.
I wanted to add that, of course, not everyone has a negative result, so maybe both Ted and Les can talk about that briefly.
Sure, I look at it basically from a tactical perspective, and for me, I do feel that there's more negative than positive in all of this. Les has more experience with experiencers and talking to them, and has a bit of a different opinion on all of that. As an organization, we're neutral in that regard. We don't come down on one side or the other in terms of whether there's good aliens or bad aliens or any of the rest of it.
Well,
Ed,
most of the
Ed-
people, yeah, most of the people that do contact us have had negative experiences. And that's why they're contacting us. We're here to help people. And so the people that are okay with the experience generally, don't need us. So it's hard to say, although, as I mentioned earlier, the free study, I think there was almost 4,000 people that they had a questionnaire from, and they came up with this figure of between 70 and 80% were having positive experiences. And within the group, we do have people that it's a process these people go through. It's a journey, a spiritual journey, as I like to call it. Where in the beginning it's very traumatic, but then they get to accept it. And then so if you ask the question in the very beginning, they might say, "Oh yeah, this is terrible." But then 5 years down the road, after 10 more experiences, they have a different viewpoint. And so it's very difficult to say it's all this or all that, as I mentioned earlier.
When I look back at my own situation, I go from I did the exact opposite. I went from thinking it was a great situation to coming to other conclusions. So, like you said, that we need more information on all of that if we really want to get to the understanding of the intent of whatever it is we're dealing with.
And that's the thing, Ted, you're absolutely right. I mean, we don't have all the answers, if any.
That's right.
This phenomena, once you go down the rabbit hole, there's so many different ways you can go with it. And so you need to be open-minded at least, and not close your mind to a particular viewpoint. And that's our organization too. Opus is a very neutral type of a place. And so we don't, if somebody comes in and say it's black and another person say it's white, okay, that's your opinion. And we're not going to change your mind. We just try to help.
I just want to remind a little bit. My question had to do with medical negative experiences. I just wanted to emphasize also that some people do not have a medical experience that is negative physically.
Yeah, I mean, these experiences can involve medical procedures, and in a lot of cases they do. And once again, whether they're extracting eggs from a woman or semen from a man, blood samples, fetuses from a woman, during a pregnancy, there's a lot going on, and it's quite intrusive. Those experiences, like Betty and Barney Hills, that needle was put into her navel, and it was very painful. But again, it depends on where you are in the process. These things usually happen in the very beginning, and then later on, they don't seem to be doing the same types of things, or they don't do any further medical procedures.
I'm sorry if I could just interject for a second here. The most important thing here is that for those that need help, there's those of us in service to them. We're here to help people who are having exposures to this. We aren't going to judge them on whether they're good or bad or anything else. What we're trying to do is make sure that their therapists are informed, that the people that they go to for help are able to help them, that aren't going to be sitting there wondering whether this person is sane or not, and can get on to actually dealing with what a person is struggling with. So go ahead, Earl.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Ted, about that. And you know, I'll try to keep this short. I recently had a therapist who she had a patient who, and this therapist had never worked with anybody who was an experiencer before. But this gentleman, he seemed to be completely, fully, you know, sane. The guy was, you know, but he had like just normal emotional life problems. But in the course of their interaction, he mentioned this encounter that he had, middle of nowhere, great, you know, the great American desert again, where he had a UFO encounter where this thing was coming towards him, and he thought that it was a meteor. He thought he was going to be toast, but it resolved in front of him. It was kind of the proverbial saucer-shaped craft. And suddenly these three entities were standing there with him on this ledge. This guy was a photographer, you know, working for different magazines, you know, Nature magazine. The therapist got a hold of Peter Robbins, and Peter Robbins, who had worked with Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and people like that, he got a hold of me and asked me if I would speak with a therapist. She was just, she didn't know what to make of it, because this guy seemed, you know, fully cogent, and but yet he had this crazy story. So anyway, and for him, he was having like depressive issues, because he missed his entities. It was sort of a one-off. He was introduced to them, and then they were gone. So anyway, she got a hold. She put me in touch with her patient. We had this wonderful talk. And she kind of was wanting me to, you know, find out if this guy was on the level or making up stories or not. Well, he was fully on the level, but what was interesting was that he asked me if I was an experiencer, if I had ever had personal contact. My story was with a little short gray guys who were pretty, you know, not very, you know, not talkative. I didn't get like a telepathic answer, like, you know, you're going to be okay, we're not going to harm you. But yeah, and I suffered ontological shock from that, which wound up, because I was able to embrace it and take it into my life, it became a positive for me. Anyway, this guy who I spoke with, it was kind of interesting, because his therapist had me get a hold of him to find out if he was on the level. And he said to me, he said, well, what you're describing, what happened to you, I'm wondering if that even happened, because it's so different from, you know, my personal encounter that I had. He was assessing my cogency, you know, in the process of this phone call. So we can't really go in there with presuppositions about how one person or the other, or how it's supposed to happen when somebody has contact. It can run the gamut, you know, and
Okay, so
that's what I found it.
thank you very much, Earl. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have each of you just briefly talk about something that UAP Med is doing, so that people understand that, you know, we have a mission and a purpose, and they can see some of what we're putting out into the world. I'm going to start with CJ and just go around.
One of the things that I appreciate about UAP Med and see that we are doing is we're trying to create a dialogue with other mental health professionals, such that we can have a safe way to communicate with folks who have these sorts of issues, with therapists who have patients with these sorts of issues. And we're developing a sort of internal kind of language and way to handle and support other professionals. And that's one of the things I see UAP Med doing. So.
Okay, Ron, you're up next.
Yeah, so I'm a sociologist, and one of the things that I've been looking at is how frequent these encounters are. This is a very important question because most people think, well, hey, if this was really going on, I would know about it. But the truth is, I've done a number of studies and so forth that suggest that a lot of times these things are not really well known, and that in particular, the number of experiencers is much higher than people think it is. And this is very important because we are now in a situation where there is a big social discourse going on about UFOs, but a lot of times abductions are left out of it. So if you have the experiences yourself, you think, well, okay, all this other stuff about the Nimitz and so forth is all very, very nice, but what about the stuff that happened to me? Okay, so I think that what UAP Med does is it provides some sort of representation for people who have these experiences and trying to open up the therapeutic and medical community to having them be able to talk to people to help them out.
Hey, Jesse.
So yeah, I mean, our number one goal was to help experiencers so they're no longer misdiagnosed when they go to see a doctor, because I've dealt with individuals that have had, like Les said earlier, over medicated, and it really doesn't help the overall problem. And then also some individuals I've talked to where they said they went to the doctor, they were put on all this medication, it wasn't working, and they were sent to a psychiatric institution. And that really doesn't help anybody. It hurts the family, it hurts everybody around them. So building this forum and creating UAP Med to educate these medical professionals, they don't have to sign up. They just go in, they read the information. Nobody has to know. So there's no ridicule from people they work with or anything like that. And then they know how to deal with the experiencers when they come in for help. And another beautiful part of it is that it doesn't just educate the medical professionals, it educates other experiencers to solidify that they know they're not alone with having these experiences. And it also educates the public on the different medical effects that people are having. So in a way, it kind of gets out into the universe and everybody gets a little piece of it and everybody gets help in the end, you know? So that's what I enjoy about this.
Okay. Earl, can you please state something that UAP Med is doing to help?
Sure. Again, for me, it's getting the word out there to medical professionals, whether doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses, all the above, because there's kind of an ignorance out there. People, for so many years, ridicule was the way that officialdom dealt with this. And there's still, unfortunately, this giggle factor around the most serious aspect to the UAP phenomenon. So it's getting the word out there. It's getting people to know that this isn't just gobbledygook and National Enquirer affair, but that this is a very, very real and active phenomenon that affects people both medically and psychologically.
Hey, Ted, you're next.
Well, sure. Helping individuals in the culture with ontological shock is kind of the primary purpose of UAP Med. We're here to inform the mental health and medical professionals so that they can deal with this rising conversation around this subject and the people that are affected by it as they come out. We're taking some rather specific steps in dealing with Congress and in informing our political leaders about our concerns and what we'd like to see as far as change in the future goes. And we anticipate that the need for what we do is going to increase. So it's our hope that we can develop maybe educational programs, find more affiliation with professionals and academics who are interested in this and want to be thought leaders, help us move this subject along. As Ron says, there's reason to think that this is a pretty common situation, these exposures. And I'd remind everybody that when Kirkpatrick, the director of Aero, spoke in January, he described UAP as potentially ubiquitous, which is a near acknowledgement these things are a lot more common than anybody imagined and or expected. And the other part of this conversation, along with what is that and how does it do it, is why is it doing it and has it hurt anybody? And that's what we're here to deal with.
And I will say that one thing I discovered, because I like to do research for UAP Med, is yes, it does hurt people. Okay, so, and David Grush just mentioned that people have also died and people just ignore that. Les, can you please name something that UAP Med is doing?
Yeah, well, if you look at our organization in affiliation with the UAP Med, we got started in 1991 as a nonprofit organization to help people having paranormal experiences. And one of the things that you know we are constantly doing is trying to ferret out mental health practitioners, medical people, hypnotherapists, certified hypnotherapists that are familiar with the topic. And with all the revelations that are going on now, there's going to be quite an increase in the number of people coming forward to talk about their experiences. And this is what this organization is all about. Get out there, get the medical community, the mental health community educated on this topic, because there's going to be a lot more people coming about, you know, telling their stories. And so for me, the timing was just incredible, because Ted started this organization before all these unbelievable revelations just recently occurred. And so Ted, timing is good. And I think that, you know, with the team that you've put together here, I think we're going to be able to do some really incredible things moving forward. And I thank you for doing what you've done to get this rolling.
Couldn't do it without all of you guys, you know, and Deb, all of you have been just a terrific help in getting this thing going, and there's more to come. We're going to do very well, I think. So thank you for stepping up.
Okay, well, thank all of you guys for coming in to talk today. We're going to go ahead and close out the Zoom. And do you want to say just one more last goodbye? Anybody want to say goodbye real quick to people here?
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your time and attention.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
folks.
UAP
guys.
MC.
I'll see you Saturday.
All right.
Okay.
Have a good
All
one,
right.
guys.
Take care.
Take care.
UAPmed.org.
Uh,
Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
UAPmed.org, that's right.
So you're part of that organization?